The girl appeared on his porch 3 days after the funeral. Samuel Merritt had been standing at the window, watching the way dust moved across the valley floor in slow, deliberate currents, when he saw her coming up the road. Small, dark hair catching the late afternoon light, walking with the kind of careful determination that spoke of miles already traveled and miles yet to go. He didn't move at first. The ranch felt too large now, too quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against the walls and made every breath sound like an accusation. He'd stopped answering the door 2 days ago when the neighbors came with their casseroles and their soft voices and their eyes that couldn't quite meet his. They meant well, they always did, but their kindness felt like drowning. The girl kept coming. Samuel watched her pass the broken gate he'd been meaning to fix for a year, watched her navigate the ruts in the road that Claire had always complained about, watched her stop at the bottom of the porch steps and look up at the house with an expression he couldn't name. She was young, 12, maybe 13, wearing a dress that had been mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. Her feet were wrapped in cloth where shoes should have been. Dust coated her from the knees down. He should have opened the door. He didn't. The girl stood there for a long moment, head tilted slightly as if she could hear him breathing on the other side of the wood. Then she sat down on the bottom step, pulled her knees to her chest, and waited. Samuel turned away from the window. The house was full of Claire. Her apron still hung on the hook by the stove. Her book, some novel about a woman in Boston, lay open on the table, spine cracked at the page she'd never finish. Her scent still clung to the bedroom, faint but unmistakable, lavender and wood smoke, and something sweeter he'd never been able to name. 3 weeks ago, she'd been laughing at something he'd said. 2 weeks ago, she'd been coughing. 1 week ago, the fever had taken her so fast he hadn't had time to say the things a man should say before the end. Now there was a strange girl on his porch, and he didn't have the strength to care why. He made coffee he didn't drink, stared at the stove, listened to the silence. When he finally looked out the window again, the sun had dropped lower, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust. The girl was still there. She hadn't moved, hadn't knocked again, just sat with her back against the post, head tipped back, eyes closed. Something in Samuel's chest twisted. He opened the door. The girl's eyes snapped open, dark, alert, old in a way that didn't match her face. She stood quickly, brushing dust from her dress in a gesture that was more habit than hope. "I'm sorry to trouble you, mister," she said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I'm looking for work." Samuel stared at her. "Work," he repeated. "Yes, sir, I can cook, clean, mend clothes, take care of animals." She spoke quickly, as if she'd said these words many times before and knew she had only a short window to make her case. "I don't eat much. I can sleep in the barn. I won't be any trouble." "Where are your people?" The girl's expression didn't change, but something shuttered behind her eyes. "Don't have any. Everyone's got someone." "Not anymore." The words hung in the air between them, blunt and final. Samuel felt the exhaustion pulling at him again, heavy and relentless. He should send her away, should point her toward town where there were families who might take her in, church women who made it their business to care for strays. But the thought of speaking to those women, of enduring their questions and their pity, made his bones ache. "What's your name?" he asked. "Annie." "Annie what?" She hesitated. "Just Annie." He looked at her for a long moment, took in the too thin arms, the hollow spaces beneath her cheekbones, the way she held herself like someone used to being told no. "I don't need help," he said. "Yes, sir." She didn't move. "I'm not looking to take anyone in." "Yes, sir." "The barn leaks. There's no extra blankets." "That's all right." Samuel closed his eyes, opened them. The girl was still there, watching him with an expression that wasn't quite hope, but wasn't resignation either. Something in between, something that knew how to wait. "One night," he said finally, "there's stew left from yesterday. You can eat, sleep in the barn, and head out in the morning." "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me yet." He stepped back into the house, leaving the door open behind him, heard her small footsteps follow him across the threshold. The kitchen felt strange with another person in it, too full and too empty at the same time. Samuel ladled stew into a bowl, Claire's stew, the last batch she'd made before the sickness took hold, and set it on the table without looking at the girl. "Eat," he said. Annie sat, picked up the spoon, paused. "Aren't we? Oh, going to eat, sir. Not hungry." She looked at him for a moment longer, then began eating. Slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned that food could disappear if you drew too much attention to it. Samuel turned away and busied himself with the stove, though there was nothing that needed doing. Behind him, he heard the quiet scrape of spoon against bowl, the small sounds of someone trying very hard to be invisible. When he finally glanced back, the girl had finished. She'd set the bowl and spoon neatly to one side and was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, waiting. "Barn's out back," Samuel said. "There's hay in the loft, should be dry enough." "Yes, sir, thank you." She stood, moved toward the door, then stopped. "So?" He didn't turn around. "What?" "I'm sorry about your wife." The words hit him like a fist to the sternum. He gripped the edge of the counter, knuckles white. "How did you?" "The black wreath on the door," Annie said quietly, "and the way the house feels." Samuel didn't ask what she meant. He knew. "Get some sleep," he said, voice rough. "Yes, sir." The door closed softly behind her. Samuel stood alone in the kitchen as the last light faded from the windows. He looked at the empty bowl on the table, at Claire's apron on the hook, at the space where a stranger had sat and eaten and somehow made the silence feel even louder. He didn't sleep that night. And in the morning, when he went to check if the girl had left like he'd told her to, he found her in the chicken coop, already collecting eggs. Samuel stood in the doorway of the coop, watching. Annie moved between the nests with practiced efficiency, murmuring softly to the hens as she worked. She'd found the egg basket, Claire's basket, woven willow with a blue ribbon tied to the handle, and was filling it with the same careful attention she'd given to eating the night before. "Morning, sir," she said without turning around. He grunted in response. "Found some grain in the barn. Fed the hens already. There's a loose board on the north side of the coop. I can fix it if you have a hammer and nails. I told you to leave in the morning." "Yes, sir." She placed the last egg in the basket and turned to face him. "It is morning." Samuel felt something that might have been annoyance or might have been amusement flicker through the numbness. He couldn't tell anymore. "You know what I meant." "Yes, sir, I did." She walked toward him, holding out the basket. 12 eggs, that's good for 5 hens. You're taking good care of them." He took the basket automatically. "I haven't been taking care of anything." "The hens don't know that." She slipped past him into the yard, already scanning the property with the same assessing gaze she'd given the coop. Samuel followed despite himself. "The fence by the road needs mending," Annie said, pointing, "and there's a shutter loose on the west window, probably letting in draft. I could." "Stop." She stopped. Samuel set the basket down on the porch rail, rubbed his face with both hands. The exhaustion was still there, constant and heavy, but underneath it something else was beginning to stir, something that felt uncomfortably like responsibility. "I don't need a farmhand," he said. "No, sir. I don't have money to pay you." "Didn't ask for money." "Then what do you want?" Annie looked at him for a long moment. The morning sun caught her face, illuminating features that were sharper than they should be at her age. She'd seen hard things, that much was clear. "A place to stay," she said simply, "just for a while." "Why here?" "Because you didn't slam the door in my face." Samuel laughed, a short, bitter sound that surprised him. "That's a low bar. You'd be surprised how many people can't clear it." The words settled between them, stark and honest. He should still send her away, should tell her to go to town, find the preacher's wife, get placed with a proper family. He wasn't equipped for this, wasn't equipped for anything anymore except staring at walls and waiting for days to pass. But the girl was already walking toward the barn, and he found himself watching the way she moved, purposeful, efficient, like someone who'd learned to make herself useful or disappear. 2 weeks, he heard himself say. Annie stopped, turned. 2 weeks, Samuel repeated. You can stay, help with the chores. After that, we'll figure something else out. Yes, sir, thank you. Don't thank me, I'm not doing you a favor. I know. She didn't smile, but something in her posture eased slightly. Samuel turned back toward the house before he could change his mind. The days that followed fell into a rhythm he hadn't expected. Annie rose before dawn and moved through the morning chores with the quiet competence of someone twice her age. She fed the animals, collected eggs, hauled water, mended the fence Samuel had been ignoring for months. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for instruction, just saw what needed doing and did it. Samuel watched from the windows mostly, occasionally ventured out to check on something or bring her tools she'd need. They didn't talk much. She seemed to understand that he had no words left for small conversation, and she didn't try to fill the silence with chatter. But she hummed sometimes while she worked. Low, tuneless sounds that drifted through the open windows and made the house feel less like a tomb. On the 4th day, he found her in Claire's garden. The plot had gone to weeds in the weeks of sickness and grief. Samuel had looked at it once after the funeral and then never again. Too much of Claire lived in that soil, her hands, her care, her small daily joy in watching things grow. Now Annie knelt in the dirt, carefully separating weeds from the struggling vegetables that remained. You don't have to do that, Samuel said from the edge of the garden. I know, she didn't look up, but it seems a shame to let it all die. It's already dying. Not all of it. She sat back on her heels, brushing hair from her face and leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. The tomatoes might make it, and the beans, they just need some attention. Samuel looked at the tangle of green, at the small clear space Annie had already created, at her hands dark with soil. She loved this garden, he said quietly. I can tell. Used to spend hours out here, said it was the only place that stayed calm. Annie nodded. My mama had a garden too, before. It was the first time she'd mentioned family. Before what? Samuel asked. Annie was quiet for a moment, then, before everything. She turned back to the weeds, and Samuel knew the conversation was over. That evening he found her sitting on the porch steps, same as that first day. The sun was setting, painting the valley in long shadows. She had her knees pulled up, chin resting on her arms, watching the light fade. Samuel sat down beside her, not close, but not far either. They sat in silence as darkness crept across the land. You're good with the work, Samuel said finally. Thank you, sir. Samuel, you can call me Samuel. Annie glanced at him, something uncertain crossing her face. That feels too familiar. We are living on the same property. I think we are past formalities. Mr. Samuel, then. He nodded, close enough. Mr. Samuel, her voice was quieter now, can I ask you something? Depends on what it is. Do you regret letting me stay? The question caught him off guard. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the fear she was trying to hide, the fear of being unwanted, of being too much trouble, of being sent away again. No, he said, and was surprised to find it was true. I don't regret it. Something in her shoulders relaxed. Everything will be fine, he said. He didn't know why, the words just came. Annie turned to look at him fully, and in the dying light, she smiled. It was a small smile, hesitant, but genuine. And in that smile, Samuel saw Claire's face. The same tilt of the mouth, the same warmth in the eyes, the same quality of light that had made him fall in love 17 years ago in a church social and never look back. His breath stopped. Annie's smile faded. Mr. Samuel, are you all right? He couldn't speak, couldn't move. The resemblance was impossible. The girl looked nothing like Claire otherwise. Different hair, different build, different age. But that smile, that exact smile. I'm fine, he managed, just tired. Yes, sir. She stood, brushed off her dress. Good night, Mr. Samuel. Good night. He sat on the porch long after she'd gone to the barn, staring at the place where she'd been sitting, trying to convince himself he'd imagined it. He hadn't. The riders came on the 6th day. Samuel heard them before he saw them, the low thunder of hooves on hard-packed earth, the jangle of tack and spurs. He was in the barn, helping Annie stack hay, when the sound reached them. She froze. The fear in her face was immediate and primal. "Annie, I have to go," her voice was tight. "Right now I have to." "Who are they?" "Please, you can't let them find me here." The desperation in her voice sent alarm through Samuel's chest. He moved to the barn door, peered out through the gap. 3 riders cresting the hill, dark hats, dusters that had seen hard miles. Something in the way they sat their horses spoke of men comfortable with violence. "Get in the loft," Samuel said. "Don't make a sound." "They'll search." "The loft, now." Annie scrambled up the ladder as the riders drew closer. Samuel walked out into the yard, positioning himself between the barn and the house, trying to look like a man with nothing to hide and no patience for visitors. The riders stopped at the fence line. The one in front, older, with a scar running from temple to jaw, leaned forward in his saddle. "Afternoon," he said. His voice was pleasant enough, the pleasantness of a snake before it strikes. "Help you with something?" Samuel kept his tone neutral. "Looking for S." Omion, young girl, dark hair, about this tall. He held his hand at chest height. "Seen anyone like that around here?" "No." The scarred man smiled. "You sure about that? Heard in town you had a visitor. Girl showed up a few days back." Samuel's jaw tightened. Someone had talked. One of the neighbors, probably, well-meaning gossip that had traveled faster than good sense. "You heard wrong." "That's so," the man dismounted, walking towards Samuel with the casual confidence of someone used to getting what he wanted. "See, that's interesting, because we've been tracking this girl for near 2 weeks now, and every time we get close, someone like you tells us they haven't seen anything. Maybe she's better at hiding than you are at finding." The scarred man stopped a few feet away. Up close, Samuel could see the meanness in his eyes, cold and patient. "This girl's a runaway," the man said. "Property of the Hollister family up in Prescott. They want her back." "Property?" Samuel let the word hang in the air. "You mean she's enslaved?" "I mean she's bound by legal contract. Her parents sold her service to pay their debts. She's got 8 more years to work off." "Slavery by another name." The scarred man's smile thinned. "I don't care what you call it. I care about my fee. Now you going to tell me where she is, or are we going to have a problem?" Samuel felt the weight of the rifle in the house, too far to reach. Felt the years of ranch work in his muscles, capable but not young. Felt the presence of Annie in the barn behind him, silent and terrified. "I told you," he said, "there's no girl here. Mind if we look around?" "I mind." The scarred man studied him for a long moment. Then he turned back to his companions, both younger, both wearing the same cold expressions. "Search the barn," he said. "You step foot on my property," Samuel said quietly, "and we will have a problem." The scarred man laughed. "Old man, you have no idea what a problem looks like. Try me." The tension stretched between them like a drawn wire. The 2 younger riders had dismounted, hands resting on their gun belts. Samuel didn't move, didn't reach for a weapon he didn't have, just stood his ground and hoped the bluff would hold. "You know what I think," the scarred man said. "I think you're a widower who's got nothing left to lose. I think you're tired and sad and maybe looking for a reason to do something stupid. Sounds like you know me pretty well. I know your type, seen plenty of men like you, always think they're doing the right thing, always end up bleeding in the dirt. At least I'll die with a clear conscience." The scarred man's expression hardened. "Last chance, where's the girl?" Samuel met his gaze and said nothing. The scarred man nodded slowly, then he turned to his companions. "Burn it." "What?" "The barn, burn it. If the girl's in there, she'll come out. If she's not, well," he smiled. "At least we'll know you were telling the truth." Samuel's blood went cold. "You can't." Can't I? The scarred man was already walking back toward his horse. Like you said, different name for the same thing, I call it persuasion. One of the younger men pulled a bottle from his saddlebag. Kerosene, the smell of it hit Samuel's nose, sharp and immediate. Wait, the word came out before he could stop it. The scarred man paused, looked back. She's in the barn, Samuel said. His voice sounded hollow in his own ears. Now we are being reasonable. But she's not your property, she's a child. That's not for you to decide. The hell it isn't. The scarred man sighed, pulled a revolver from his belt with practiced ease, aimed it at Samuel's chest. Here's how this works, he said. You're going to walk into that barn, you're going to bring the girl out, and then you're going to go back to your empty house and forget this ever happened. Or he cocked the hammer. I put a bullet in you, take the girl anyway, and burn your barn for the trouble, your choice. Samuel looked at the gun, at the scarred man's finger resting lightly on the trigger, at the two younger men moving toward the barn with the kerosene. He thought about Claire, about the way she'd fought for things that mattered, about the fire in her eyes when she talked about justice and mercy and the distance between the two. He thought about Annie in the loft, holding her breath, waiting to see if he would betray her. All right, Samuel said. The scarred man lowered the gun. Smart man. Samuel turned toward the barn, took 3 steps, stopped. Annie, he called, come down. Silence. Annie, it's okay, come down. More silence, then the soft sound of movement in the loft, the creak of the ladder. Annie appeared at the barn door, face pale, eyes wide with terror. She looked at Samuel, at the riders, at the gun still visible in the scarred man's hand. Everything will be fine, Samuel said. And Annie smiled. That same smile, Claire's smile, the one that had stopped his heart too nig. HTS ago. But this time, something else flickered behind it, something that looked almost like forgiveness. The scarred man stepped forward. Come here, girl. Annie didn't move. I said come here. She looked at Samuel one more time, then she started walking toward the riders. Samuel's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Every instinct screamed at him to do something, anything, but the gun was still there, and the odds were still impossible, and he had already lost everything that mattered. He was about to lose one more thing. The gunshot split the air before anyone could move. But it didn't come from the scarred man's revolver. It came from the house. Everyone turned. The front door stood open, and in the doorway Samuel saw something impossible, Claire's rifle, the one she'd kept above the mantel, the one he hadn't touched since she died. But he wasn't holding it now. Old Thomas Farrow was. The neighboring rancher stood with the rifle braced against his shoulder, aimed at the sky. A warning shot. His weathered face was set in hard lines, and behind him, Samuel could see 2 more figures emerging, Bill Hammond and his oldest son, both carrying shotguns. That's far enough, Thomas called out. The scarred man's head snapped toward the house. This isn't your concern. Maybe not, but we're making it our concern anyway. Thomas walked down the porch steps, rifle still raised. See, word travels fast around here. Someone mentioned bounty hunters nosing around, figured Samuel might need some company. Bill and his son fanned out, flanking the yard. Neither pointed their weapons at the riders, but the message was clear. The scarred man's jaw tightened. You people have no idea what you're interfering with. Don't much care, Thomas said. What I know is you're on Samuel's property, threatening him and a child. That's enough for me. She's a runaway. She's a child, Bill interrupted. And out here, we don't hold with chasing children like animals. The scarred man looked between the 3 armed men, calculating odds. His companions had backed away from the barn, hands hovering near their weapons, but not drawing. 3 against 3, not the easy intimidation they'd planned on. This isn't over, the scarred man said finally. Yes, Thomas replied, it is. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the scarred man holstered his revolver and swung back into his saddle. His companions followed suit, mounting up with angry, jerky movements. You're making a mistake, the scarred man said, looking at Samuel. All of you. Wouldn't be the first time, Samuel replied. The riders turned and rode off, dust rising in their wake. Samuel watched until they disappeared over the hill, his heart still hammering against his ribs. Thomas lowered the rifle. They'll be back. I know. You should have told someone the girl was here. I didn't think, Samuel stopped. I didn't think anyone would care. Thomas walked over and clapped a hand on Samuel's shoulder. We're not as heartless as you think. Claire wouldn't have wanted you facing this alone. The mention of her name sent a familiar ache through Samuel's chest. He looked at Annie, still standing frozen near the barn door, and saw the tears streaming down her face. Thank you, Samuel said to Thomas, to all of them. Don't thank us yet. Like I said, they'll be back, probably with more men. Then what do? We figure it out. Thomas glanced at Annie. Come on, girl, let's get you inside. You're shaking like a leaf. They moved into the house, all of them, filling the space that had been empty for so long with voices and movement and the solid presence of people who cared. Bill's son started coffee. Thomas set the rifle back above the mantel. Bill began talking about what they knew of bounty hunters and legal contracts and what could and couldn't be done. Samuel sat at the table with Annie beside him. She hadn't spoken since the riders left, just sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the scarred wood. You all right? Samuel asked quietly. She nodded, didn't look up. Annie. I'm sorry, her voice was barely a whisper. I should have told you, I should have left before they came. I didn't mean to bring trouble. Hey, Samuel reached over and gently lifted her chin until she was looking at him. This isn't your fault. But this isn't your fault, he repeated. You understand me. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't have anywhere else to go. I know. My parents, they sold me when I was 8, said it was temporary, said they'd buy my contract back when they had the money. Her voice cracked. They never came, and the Hollisters, they weren't good people, Mr. Samuel, they weren't good at all. Samuel felt rage building in his chest, the kind of rage that made men do violent things. What did they do to you? It doesn't matter now. It matters. Annie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. The work was hard, but that wasn't the worst part, The worst part was how they looked at me, like I wasn't a person, like I was just something they owned. You're not property. The law says I am. The law's wrong. Thomas, who'd been listening from across the room, spoke up. There might be a way around it. Everyone turned to look at him. Contract law's complicated, Thomas said, but if Samuel here formally adopted the girl, made her his legal daughter, the contract might be contestable. Family bonds can supersede servitude agreements. It's rare, but it's been done. Samuel felt something shift in his chest. Adopt her. It's just a legal strategy, Thomas said quickly. Paperwork, but it might give you grounds to fight the Hollisters in court. Samuel looked at Annie, saw the hope and fear warring in her expression. Would that work? Annie asked. Could he really do that? It's worth trying, Bill said. Better than waiting for those men to come back with reinforcements. The room fell quiet. Samuel could feel everyone watching him, waiting for his answer, could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on his shoulders. He thought about Claire, about the children they'd tried to have and lost, about the empty rooms in the house and the silence that had become unbearable, about the garden Annie had saved and the way she hummed while she worked and the smile that had stopped his heart. Annie, he said slowly, can I ask you something? Yes, sir. That day on the porch, when I said everything would be fine, you smiled. She nodded. You looked just like my wife when you smiled. Annie's eyes widened. I did. Exactly like her, same expression, same warmth. He paused. Has anyone ever told you that before? No, sir, I don't think I've smiled much, not for a long time. Samuel felt something crack open inside him, some wall he'd built to keep the grief contained. I think, he said quietly, Claire would have liked you very much. Annie's lower lip trembled. Really? Really? Mr. Samuel, if I did this, he interrupted, if I legally adopted you, it wouldn't be just paperwork, not to me, you understand that. Annie stared at him. I don't do things halfway, Samuel continued. If you're my daughter on paper, you're my daughter for real. That means I protect you, I teach you, he swallowed hard. I be your family, for as long as you need one. But I'm just. You're not just anything, you're Annie, and you've saved this ranch more in 6 days than I have in 6 weeks, and when you smile, his voice broke, you look like the person I loved most in this world. Tears were streaming down Annie's face now. I don't know how to be a daughter. I don't know how to be a father, but maybe we can figure it out together. Annie nodded, unable to speak. Thomas cleared his throat. I'll ride to town first thing tomorrow, talk to Judge Matheson, we'll get the paperwork started. Thank you, Samuel said. In the meantime, Bill added, me and the boy will keep watch tonight. Those bounty hunters might try something after dark. Samuel wanted to argue, wanted to say he could handle it himself, but he'd learned something in the past hour. He didn't have to handle things alone, not anymore. I appreciate that, he said. The men set to making plans. Samuel sat with Annie at the table, holding her hand, feeling something he hadn't felt since Claire died. Purpose. The bounty hunters didn't come that night. Or the next night. Or the night after that. Thomas returned from town with complicated news. Judge Matheson was willing to consider the adoption, but the legal process would take time, weeks, maybe months, and the Hollisters had powerful friends in Prescott. They wouldn't give up their claim easily. But there's something else, Thomas said, standing in Samuel's kitchen on the third day. The judge did some digging. Turns out the Hollisters' contract with Annie's parents has some irregularities. Samuel leaned forward. What kind of irregularities? The kind that suggest it might not be legally binding. Her parents were illiterate, signed with marks instead of signatures, and there's no evidence they understood the terms they were agreeing to, if we can prove coercion or fraud. The contract could be voided, Samuel finished. It's a long shot, but it's something. Samuel looked at Annie, who was washing dishes at the basin. She'd been quiet since the confrontation, more withdrawn. He'd catch her staring out windows sometimes, watching the horizon like she expected riders to appear at any moment. What do you think? He asked her. Annie dried her hands on a towel. I think those men won't wait for a judge's decision. Then we'll be ready. Mr. Samuel. I meant what I said, Annie. You're under my protection now. That means something. She looked at him with those old, too-knowing eyes. It might mean you get hurt or killed. Everyone dies eventually. But not everyone dies for a runaway girl. You're not a runaway, Samuel stood walk. Ed over to her, you're my daughter, and I'll be damned if I let anyone take you. Thomas coughed. I'll let you two talk, but Samuel, be careful. Those bounty hunters have a reputation, they don't play fair. Neither do I, not anymore. After Thomas left, Samuel and Annie sat on the porch as the sun began its descent. The valley spread out before them, golden and vast. Claire had loved this time of day, called it the gentle hour when the light softened and the world felt forgiving. Can I tell you something? Annie asked. Anything. I didn't know what your wife looked like. When you said I smiled like her, I didn't understand, but last night I found a photograph in the front room. Samuel knew the one, Claire at 25, standing beside a fence, laughing at something off camera. I looked at it for a long time, Annie continued, trying to see what you saw, and I think maybe it's not that I look like her, I think it's that you wanted to see her, in me. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Maybe, he admitted, at first, but not anymore. What changed? You did. The more I got to know you, the person you are, the more I realized you're not a replacement for Claire. You're just Annie, and that's enough, more than enough. Annie's eyes glistened. I've never been enough for anyone. You're enough for me. She reached over and took his hand. They sat like that as the sun sank lower, father and daughter by choice, if not by blood. The riders came back a week later. But this time, Samuel was ready. He'd spent the week preparing, checking weapons, fortifying the barn, talking to neighbors. Word had spread about the girl and the bounty hunters, and the community had rallied in ways that surprised him. Men he barely knew stopped by to offer help. Women brought food. Even the sheriff from town rode out to take statements. "Those Hollister people have been causing trouble for years," the sheriff said. "If we can make a case against them, I'd be happy to pursue it." When the riders appeared on the horizon, 7 of them, this time, Samuel was standing in his yard with 12 armed men behind him. Neighbors, friends, people who'd decided that some things were worth standing for. The scarred man pulled up short when he saw the gathering. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he called out. "No," Samuel replied. "I'm making it exactly as hard as it should be. We have a legal claim." "A fraudulent claim," the sheriff interrupted, stepping forward. "I've reviewed the contract. It's not worth the paper it's written on, and even if it were, the girl's under the protection of a legal adoption petition now. You want to pursue this, you'll have to do it in court." The scarred man's face darkened. "You can't adopt someone else's property." "She's not property," Samuel said. "She's a child, my child, and if you want to take her, you'll have to go through every man here." The standoff stretched. Samuel could feel the tension in the air, thick and dangerous, could see the scarred man calculating, weighing options, deciding if it was worth the fight. Finally, the scarred man spat into the dirt. "This isn't over." "Yes," Samuel said, "it is." The riders turned and left. This time, Samuel knew they wouldn't be back. The legal battle took 4 months. The Hollisters fought hard, but Judge Matheson was thorough. He reviewed the contract, interviewed witnesses, listened to Annie's testimony. In the end, he ruled that the contract was invalid due to fraud and coercion, and that Annie was free. The adoption was finalized 3 weeks later. Samuel stood in the courthouse with Annie beside him, listening to the judge declare her legally his daughter. Thomas and Bill were there, along with half the town. When it was done, people clapped and shook his hand and told him he'd done a good thing. But Samuel barely heard them. He was looking at Annie, at his daughter, and seeing the way she stood straighter now, the way color had returned to her cheeks, the way she smiled more freely. That night they had dinner at the ranch. Annie had cooked chicken and potatoes and biscuits that were almost as good as Claire's. They ate together at the table, talking about plans for the garden and whether they should get another horse come spring. After dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the stars emerge. "Mr. Samuel," Annie's voice was soft. "Just Samuel, or Pa if you want." She smiled. "Pa feels strange." "It does, but we'll get used to it." "Pa," she said, testing it, then again with more confidence, "Pa." "Yes. Thank you for everything." Samuel put his arm around her shoulders. "You don't have to thank me." "I want to." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Annie spoke again. "Do you think she would have approved, your wife?" Samuel thought about Claire, about her fierce sense of justice and her gentle heart, about the way she'd always said their house was too quiet and needed the sound of children. "Yeah," he sighed. I think she would have loved you." Annie leaned against him. "I wish I could have met her." "Me too." "But in a way," Annie said thoughtfully, "I think maybe I did, through you, through this place, through everything she left behind." Samuel felt tears prick his eyes. "She'd like that you're taking care of her garden." "I'm going to make it even better next year. Plant more things, maybe some flowers by the porch." "She'd like that too." They watched the stars wheel overhead, father and daughter, in a house that was no longer silent. Years later, when Annie was grown and had a family of her own, she would return to the ranch with her children, would show them the garden she'd tended, the barn where she'd once hidden, the porch where a grieving man had made a promise that changed both their lives. And she would tell them the story, about the day she'd appeared on a stranger's doorstep, desperate and alone, and how he'd looked at her and seen not a burden but a second chance. "Everything will be fine," he'd told her that day on the porch. And he'd been right. Not because the world became easy or because pain disappeared, but because they'd faced it together, because he'd chosen love over loss, because she'd given him a reason to live again. And when she smiled, that warm, genuine smile that lit up her whole face, her children would lean in close, and she would whisper the same truth Samuel had discovered all those years ago. Sometimes, the people we need most arrive exactly when we're ready to give up. Sometimes, salvation wears a stranger's face. And sometimes, in a smile, we find everything we thought we'd lost, and everything we never knew we needed. The ranch stood on that valley floor for another 50 years. Annie's children took it over eventually, and their children after that. The garden bloomed every spring. The barn stood strong against the weather. And on quiet evenings, when the light turned golden and the wind moved through the grass just so, people said you could almost hear it, the sound of two voices on the porch. One older, weathered by grief and time. One younger, bright with hope and second chances. Talking softly as the stars came out. A father and daughter. Together at last.